All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Um, I've heard that with it being this time of year, some of you might or might not have responsibilities at work, and that might make 2 or 3 hour meetings frowned upon in the middle of the day. So I want to jump right in and share with you some ideas and thoughts that we had. I met most of you yesterday. I just want to let everybody know, had a great day yesterday. Really good conversations. Got to see a lot about this community. Unbelievably impressed with what's going on right now in El Dorado. I mean, between the different, not only the different organizations and the initiatives, but the relationships between those organizations and just the partnerships that exist and the overall temperature. It is amazing how much you typically go into a community, and to put it bluntly, there's a tremendous amount of childish infighting when the realization is actually you are fighting against the world. You should not be fighting with yourself, because the battle over growing economy is a much larger issue. And if you're fighting in yourself, you're losing talent, you're losing residents, you're losing dollars. So it was just a really, really great day. I've got a bunch of stuff to show you. I always like to start with a quick recap of what I heard yesterday. Obviously, the focus of this process is focused in on both downtown and the Main Street organization. There seemed to be a lot of positivity around Main Street and around downtown. There weren't any major negatives that I think rose to the top in terms of issues that we need to proactively address. So there's kind of a mixture of positivity and anonymity, if that makes sense. I mean, some people might or might not know exactly what Main Street organization is and what it does, but there didn't seem to be any overarching negative. Huge change, huge capital investments in downtown and Murphy Arts District and everything that's going on. So overall, the temperature of the community seems to be very positive, very excited. We talked about the difference between being excited and being cautiously optimistic. And in a community like this, you always expect to get some of that cautiously optimistic. That's the way that it works. They sometimes communities don't feel like they deserve nice things. And I'm not sure, Austin, with the stuff you guys are doing, I don't know if you picked up on that, but sometimes it's almost one of those things where communities that are somewhat humble don't exactly know how to embrace nice things because they're not convinced that they actually deserve nice things. And so you have to kind of work with them. You have to kind of teach them through that. One of the big things that we talked about yesterday is this separation out between the organization logo and the destination logo. You are Main Street El Dorado, but you are promoting downtown El Dorado. So you need to have two different tools in that toolbox, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. Speaking about the toolbox, there are 4 main components that we focus in on: color palette, typefaces, consistent message, and approach to graphics. Now, knowing that you have a community that about 7 years ago went through a major branding effort with Roger Brooks and a major investment in that, and we see that investment continuing to be implemented, you have to consider those resources. And then you also have to consider the investment going on at MAB and the branding that exists for MAB. So it only makes sense that as we approach branding recommendations for downtown and the Main Street organization, that we are mindful and sensitive to pre-existing brand systems, and we do things that help to show everyone that we're playing together while also preserving the individuality of the organization, so you can heighten awareness of what it is Main Street does. Does that make sense? And hopefully we'll be able to make that clear as I show you the examples. Always like to get down some of the values that I feel like I heard. Also made a great point, this idea of an oasis of good. I left out you have to travel through the sea of bad to get to the oasis of good, but honestly, that dynamic is nearly universal. So the reason I left it out is not to avoid the bad, but simply to acknowledge it's a universal dynamic. Most communities have entry corridors that they are not particularly proud of. Now, one of the things that I will tell you is you have, not only do you have entry corridors that are somewhat problematic from a visual standpoint, as you continue to build these amenities and you see private sector investment in things like hotels, I do think that you have a particular corridor that you need to make sure that you have a focus on from a physical standpoint. And it's that corridor that connects your lodging amenities to your downtown core. So I'm not sure that that typically would be a top priority. Many times we're looking at some of the other entry corridors as primaries, but that relationship between being at a hotel and going into the downtown district, that needs to be one of the top priorities. I'm sure you've already talked about it, but from an outside point of view, I'm just reinforcing that's a very important travel corridor. So
there's already
a corridor study.
Yeah, well, yeah, they're supposed to start, when they're gonna redo 82?
It's about 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Is it that far out?
Well, before the shovel starts hitting the dirt.
Gotcha.
It's already worked with the highway department, it's a corridor.
And I will tell you, and I'm gonna talk about street banners in a little while, that corridor is the perfect example of how well-designed street banners can dramatically hide physical disinvestment. So that's a really, really interesting place. You truly do serve as the heart of the community. You serve as kind of the symbolism of the things that people are proud of. You are made of many parts. And being made of many parts is an important emotion. It's an important concept to wrap your arms around as you talk about downtown, because you do have these different sub areas, and you also have and acknowledge that you have people who feel left out because they feel like there's spotlights on the square or there's spotlights on MAD. And if you don't exist in one of those two things, you're forgotten about. So this idea of downtown truly being an umbrella of a larger area, and remember what we talked about yesterday, it is an area with hazy borders. The more successful you are, the more people who are going to consider themselves to be in downtown, and that's completely fine. That has nothing to do with Main Street's defined district. And then finally, this truly is the place where your unique character as a community is derived. There's not a whole lot about your Atwoods that's different than someone else's Atwoods, right? So the uniqueness of place is truly derived from the core. From there, I took a look at color palette, and what I did is I'm recommending a 5-color color palette. I tried to de-emphasize the colors that Beth hates. No, I'm just kidding. So we tied into the yellow and the red of the overall community brand. Those are the two most prominent colors of that brand system. They're also the two colors that we know are going to be dominant in the huge community investment of wayfinding signage. So to ignore that is to ignore the infrastructure that is teaching people how to take advantage of your community. So you have to acknowledge that as well. On the other side of the spectrum, I really loved how MAD actually has, I think, a 6-color palette. They shared their brand guide as well. They've got a nice, robust package as well. They have a yellow that's a little bit calmer, and they have some different variations of some of those colors, but I loved how that blue was not a traditional, rich, royal. It avoids too many primaries, which essentially evokes amateur. That makes sense? And it allows it to exist in a really nice professional palette. And one of the things that was kind of missing from those was a green. I didn't want to use green a ton, but I actually ended up sampling a green out of the sculpture. And so your color palette is literally derived from pre-existing identity systems and amenities that exist in your district. Now, does anybody want to take a guess why, as I was looking through, why I would have selected 4 colors? Why 4?
There's 4 points.
Boom. Simple. I know. You get a free piece of pizza, right? So The main reason that I went with 4 is because I wanted to be able to use colors to help denote both the focuses of the organization as well as the 4-point approach. But I want to say loud and clear that in the world of your primary, and you'll really see this in the downtown brand, it's the yellow, the red, and the blue are the things that rise to the top. Because those are the things that seem to make the most sense with everything that's going on. Now, from there, I selected 2 typefaces that were, one was already defined. So the primary typeface is called Simple Type. This was defined in the Roger Brooks branding system. It is a clean, bold sans serif. It's very, very similar to the sans serif that Mad used for the large all caps letters. I think that's Burton Base, if my memory serves me correctly. So they're very, very simple, similar to one another. And as I said here, it's a clean connection. A lot of times, a community goes and decides that they're historic, so they go out and they pick papyrus, you know, or they decide they're pretty, so they pick something that is curly, you know, and it's like, that's not how this works. This is about communication. So by selecting this primary typeface, it actually lands on something that's intended to be somewhat content neutral, so that you can infuse your own personality in the things that you do. Now, with the accent typeface, I did something that none of the other systems really had done yet. When Roger Brooks suggested the overall brand, we all know the El Dorado as the primary logo. But there's no reference to what typeface created that. There's no definition of that typeface. If it was custom created, then that means you can never recreate anything close to it. It was custom. So I went through and I selected something that was pretty similar. But I want to read the description that I wrote so you know exactly where. I'm doing this with a little bit of caution. I am your accent typeface. I am hard to read. I should be used like a strong perfume, sparingly. I connect to the overall community brand as a thoughtful accent. So literally, as you see the things that I show you today, you're probably only going to see this used twice. But just because it's used rarely doesn't mean that it shouldn't be used and it shouldn't be accessed. So you'll kind of see that's an important ability for you to tie in to that overall, because that look and feel is so distinctive, it gives you that opportunity to have that thoughtful connection. Now from there, I always like to look at what we call a word type. And a word type is how you approach your name. You've got El Dorado taken care of. That's already kind of set in stone. But I wanted to focus in on downtown. And knowing that the word type for the community is what it is, I wanted something that was bold, something that really stuck out. So the preferred usage, I actually stacked them on top of each other. And just to kind of show you a little bit about design nerdness, because the letters are different, and I wanted this to appear as a block, I aligned the N's on this side, I aligned the D and the T on this side. I then had to make sure that the cross of the T and the cross of the D, the width of the D, were the same. What ended up happening was, because of these letters, the O's are not aligned. And they're not aligned because there's a difference between a D and a T. So, does that make any difference to anybody? No, it just looks right. It looks like it's supposed to look. And you have this defined, kind of thoughtful composition of what downtown looks like. So when you start to tie all that stuff in together, you start off with what we just call the destination brand. This is that downtown logo. And when you pull all the elements together, the typefaces, the colors, what I'm recommending is something that's just kind of easy to see and easy to understand. Now, I have to be honest, some of the showtime, some of the like over-the-top kind of ticket and making everything, there are wayfinding recommendations in there where the whole thing looks like a very, very complex ticket graphic in wayfinding signage. Some of that stuff might not translate. So I wanted to make sure that as you continue on with a community-wide message, you've got some simple ways that you can connect in. This shows a simple ticket background. Being able to go through and start to create some additional tools and graphics that you can use. I love the little elements that you see throughout the community. But they're not things that should be your logo. They should be part of that communication system. And I mean, Paul said it yesterday when we were talking. He said, it all comes together downtown. Like, this is the place where you can kind of see the culmination of everyone's hard work and everyone's success. So being able to play off of that concept is something it's pretty easy to take and run with. And having a system that works in one color, it works in reversed out, and then that way, if you absolutely hate yellow, you have a blue option and a red option. So, you know, when you're always painting yourself into a full color corner, it's not always working real well. So going ahead and kind of thinking that process out. But then being able to talk about the relationship between districts that make up the downtown. Now, we know that there were suggestions about Union Square and all that kind of stuff. Look, you people call it the square. That's what you call it. That's what it is to you, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's the thing that was trying to be conveyed was this idea that Union Square is more marketable than downtown because only you have Union Square. Well, if you don't call it Union Square, then it doesn't make any difference. Like, you got to be able to communicate the way that people communicate, and they call it the square. And it is part of your downtown. And there's so much excitement around MAD, and it is part of your downtown. And this creates a platform for potential future growth of new investment districts down the road if need be. So you start to kind of create those platforms, but then you move over and you start looking at the organization. And we talked about it yesterday, and you said, now's the perfect time for the organization to move into a point of being clean, professional, and economic development driven. So I wanted to create something that was just that. Just because one of your roles is historic preservation does not mean you have to have old windows as your logo. I've worked with hundreds of Main Street communities, and I talk about how in Main Streets it's almost like West Side Story, where you're either the Sharks or the Jets. You know, it's like you're either like a streetscape or you're a street sign, and that's kind of the way that it works. I wanted to give you something that was just kind of clean and played off of some of the interesting dynamics of your downtown district. You have a very, very rigid grid system until you get down to Locust, and then some of the blocks start to break apart and get wider and kind of cool. But I also knew that there was so much focus on the square that I was like, well, what is the image that is least like a square? And it's a circle. So how do I take those two and connect them together? So what I'm showing you is something that just kind of looks like this. It's just a reference to your own street grid and that convergence from the square down into MAD. It gives you this overall system where having this simple circular icon as you begin to use it can come to represent the organization. I showed these as, you know, simple iconic representations of social media profiles. Can you do that in the beginning? No, because nobody knows what that means. But as you use it, it goes and starts to represent your voice. You can see that we set up at least 3 different formats so that you can have very horizontal, stacked, and vertical. Right now, you got one version, and one version's all you got. So if it's taller than it is wide, guess what? It don't matter. So now you start to have different versions of that tool. And then also you can see here what we've done is we've pulled those 4 colors out and used them to represent the 4-point approach. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to. This might only appear in a brochure about your organization. Doesn't mean that you have to turn this into some sort of strict system or anything like that. It just helps people to understand what is this Main Street organization and why might I volunteer to be a part of it. So now, once you see that foundation, you start to see that you have a system that is tied to one another. It clearly separates out the organization and the destination while still paying tribute and acknowledging both the pre-existing community brand as well as the new investment and energy of the branding. Now, from there, we move into the brand extension, and this is where I took a look at some of the events. I didn't ask permission for any of this, so who knows if I even got it right, but I think that it will illustrate the point. Obviously, Music Fest, huge event that you all have been working on. When you get into the events, you get the opportunity to have a little bit more character that's directly connected with that. Now, a lot of times people ask, they're confused about this idea of event logos because they know year after year they want the artwork to change, they want their marketing to change, especially if there's merchandising, they want that merchandising to change so that they can constantly shift up that revenue. But being able to have some sort of graphic identity that's consistent, simply to acknowledge that this is an ongoing event is something that makes a lot of sense. So going through, you can go and adopt additional typefaces in these uses that tie into the individual personality of the event that you're trying to put on. Because believe it or not, if you have Brad Paisley, a Brad Paisley audience might be a little bit different than the show that's Sunday, you know? So being able to play up to your audience and have that versatility. Doing things with, you know, Showdown at Sunset. This next one is, I love this, because I wanted to do something for Christmas, but guess what? When you do Christmas, what's your logo? It's a Christmas tree, or it's an ornament, or it's a wreath, right? Like, it's always the same. So I wanted, you don't have to use this, but it shows you how can you make things creative. So I took your Pegasus and turned it into a reindeer, you know, but just different ways that you can truly make something yours. And then all of a sudden you start to have your event series, which we know some of these events are multi-organizational. Some of them exist with partnerships between groups. But by tying into similar color palettes and typefaces, it starts to contribute brand equity into the district and gain confidence about all the great things that are happening in downtown El Dorado. Does that make sense? So then from there, I always like to look at collateral material. The first thing that I wanted to just touch on briefly, the website. The website for Main Street is, you can tell it's designed and it's professionally created, but you can also tell that, if I can say it nicely, it's clunky. It's not nimble the way that modern websites probably need to be. So as you all talk about integrating any new brand identity into your Main Street website, I highly recommend that you look at some sort of open source content management system that allows you to run updates internally. The most popular is WordPress. It's not the most sophisticated. But I think a lot of times people they'll talk bad about WordPress because it's so ubiquitous, but it also has amazing support. If you have a question, you Google it, and there'll be a video that tells you how. So that could be something that you explore. There's also one called Joomla and one called Drupal. And those three kind of round out the most prominent content management systems. But being able to have that opportunity to do standard content updates in-house or have a division of content updates throughout the board is very, very important. And then you maintain the graphics updates to your graphics partner. Being able to incorporate the brand into materials like just having a business card, making sure you got a nice professional looking business card. Being able to take this platform and tie it into some of your initiatives, like the ambient music, the public Wi-Fi. We heard you talking about doing public art that maybe connected in with the timber industry. I'm not sure. One of the things we heard a lot of talk yesterday about Deltic lumber, but we didn't hear any mention yesterday about the Potlatch merger and acquisition. So not sure whether, like, is that a big question mark? Do we not know exactly what that's going to mean? Do we not know how that's going to affect it? But I think that it's an important part of both your current economy and your history. Anytime you think about public art, think about ways that that art can be engaging and entrancing and enthralling. That's really, really important. You talked a little bit about being able to do some sort of brochure that helps to communicate what Main Street does. And it might be a piece that helps to draw in volunteers, people that focus in on helping out with the organization. So I designed a cover, and then also included, this is an example of one that I created for a community in Missouri. So it shares the vision, mission, talks a little bit about what they do, and then has a sign-up form integrated into it. So that gives a good foundation of what one of these might contain, what might be inside it. Now, banners. You have banners up. They're banners throughout the district. The banners are, again, professionally designed, and they look good. If I could give one critique, the one critique is they're busy. That's not always a bad thing. It just means that in certain contexts, you want clarity and repetition more so than you want activity and graphics. If you're working on a corridor, just like we talked about, you want your banners to tighten the visual cone and lower the ceiling by having repetition, calming repetition. So I just went ahead and I designed a variation that could be kind of an additional banner in your overall palette. Now, you can imagine as you're rotating banners around, you can imagine using a color system along the square where you have one color per side. A lot of times people see recommendations like this and their automatic instinct is, oh, well, we rotate the color for every pole. No, create rhythm and use the colors to extend down the nodes so people feel like they're missing out on things if they're not moving past the square and exploring their way down those streets. So be really strategic with those banners. I love how right now you have mad banners when you're not in the Murphy Arts District. That's counterintuitive to a lot of people. They're like, well, why would you put these where the district's not? Well, if they're already in the district, then they've discovered the district. So being able to use banners to help highlight that there are other things to see. We did a system in Stanton, Virginia, and they have the Woodrow Wilson Birthplace Library, and they're the home of the American Shakespeare Theater. And they wanted to put Shakespeare Theater banners at the Shakespeare Theater and Presidential Library banners at the Presidential Library. It's like, they've already made it, so flip-flop them. And there was what they ended up seeing is they ended up seeing double visits increase where singular kind of tunnel vision visits had been prevalent before then. Being able to make these resources available for collateral materials, okay? This is make the tools available to the business community and allow them to profit off of them. We as Main Street organizations are really, really good at creating what I call car wash t-shirts. You know, the ones that have 7,000 logos on the back and the only time you ever wear them is when you cut the grass or paint. So make sure that there are well-designed merchandise available that people are proud to wear so that they're really taking that identity forward. Another thing that I wanted to share was, these are some examples from Jonesboro. This is kind of a one-page annual report of sorts, some stats about the organization. But we talked a lot yesterday about sponsorship and the importance of the single ask. Going through, thinking about your year, creating an opportunity to do that single ask and that contribution that lasts year long. So I designed a cover for what a sponsorship package for next year could look like, and then included an example that I had worked with a community in Michigan on. So it goes through and kind of pre-identifies the events, sponsorship opportunities, and ways that you can kind of think through and plan a give up front. So hopefully that will help as you kind of approach that. In addition to that, making things that acknowledge your volunteers, making them feel both special. This isn't the prettiest t-shirt, but you feel really special when you feel like you're at an event and your staff, you know, that giant staff on the back for some reason like empowers people to feel better than everybody. So, you know, doesn't have to be yellow, can be blue. We've heard a lot of conversation about color already today. But, you know, just being able to have that impact, that visual impact to stick out from the crowd. And then something else that we talked about was vibrancy grants. And I'm calling this Colorful Downtown. What this does is this is a great project that your design committee could take on where you focus in on anything that adds life to downtown. Chairs, benches, flags, banners, flowers, umbrellas, bistro tables, plantings, interactive art, interactive games, open storefronts. It just, you can start to see these different ways to breathe life into your district, and it has to be visible. Like, these are the kind of things where you want people to be able to see it. Interesting ways to integrate art. For some reason, we always talk about murals, and we want to paint them on the sides of buildings. You can paint them on sidewalks. You can paint them on crosswalks. You can paint them on the tactile crossing strips that are the ADA strips. You know, taking advantage of every opportunity to create that small opportunity for discovery. Integrating in, just interesting, I love this one up in the top. These are propane tanks, and this artist took them and welded them together and essentially created these stationary drums. And there's something about things you can beat on and things with water that are just magnetic, where it's like, okay, I just need to touch that just for a second. The chalkboards have been very, very popular where you're going through, before I die, I'd love to see, whatever that kind of thing is. Having buskers, having games, cornhole, giant Jenga, checker, any of that kind of stuff. I mean, being able to just give opportunities for people to have that brief moment of discovery. And then we even talked about bike racks. I think that was something else that came out from design committee, the idea about doing bike racks. So you can see, coming in, you have some complicated circumstances because you've got pre-existing brands, you've got the need to maintain your own kind of recognition as an organization, but you've just done so many good things and you have so many things on the plate that as it started to roll, it feels like the system started to make sense and the pieces start to connect to one another. And once you have the foundation in place, it actually makes it a lot easier for you to take that ball and run with it. So the next time that you have an event, you're not starting with a blank slate. You have certain elements that make it a little bit easier to know where to start from. And then from there are a couple other things that I wanted to share, and I didn't really know exactly how to turn them into a slide. There seems like there's something interesting, an interesting opportunity between having people explore and discover your downtown district and your name. And I have not seen any historic context or reference to the El Dorado of legend. And I know that you can very quickly be hokey when you do those certain things. But I mean, when you have the idea of a hidden city, and we want people to explore your community, there seems like there has to be something in there, you know? Has any organization or any effort ever been played to that angle at all? Or has that been avoided on purpose for some reason? I mean, sometimes It's like, we're El Dorado, not El Dorado, so we don't want to confuse it anymore, and like, I kind of get
And I
that.
think you just nailed it right
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
I've lived here for 44 years.
Yeah.
And I've never seen any attempt to play the two in the
Gotcha.
same sentence.
Gotcha.
You get a little offended.
Sure, sure. Well, it's funny, I mean, I work all over the country, and you know, Virginia is notorious. In Virginia, they pronounce names of their communities wrong on purpose, so they can know whether you're a Yankee. So, you know, what looks like it would be Buena Vista is Buena Vista. What looks like it's Staunton is Stanton. Like, they do it all over the state. What looks like would be Fries is Freeze, and it's all about knowing whether you know what you're talking about or not. So that does actually make a lot of sense. But then it also, we worked in Beaufort, South Carolina, and you have Beaufort, South Carolina, and Beaufort, North Carolina. Same spelling, completely different pronunciations. So it was one of the things that I acknowledged, but if it is derived from, we don't want to make that connection because that's not how we say it, then that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. The other thing is, you all serve as kind of an interesting role as a retail hub for a much, much larger region. Sometimes that retail hub, it's definitely a benefit because it draws people in, but sometimes it can work against you in the mindset of your consumers because they feel forced to come because they don't have any other options. And they don't have a mindset of exploration. They feel like they already know because they're having to make this effort to go somewhere to do a certain kind of shopping. So as you continue to promote the downtown district, you have to understand that a lot of your consumers that are coming into the market from outside the market don't consider, like, it's not in their consideration set to take a side trip to explore the downtown district. So creatively, how can we open that option up to them? How can we introduce? And believe it or not, the wayfinding signage, wayfinding never convinces someone to do something, but it can do an awful good job at introducing the idea that you're missing out on something. So with the introduction of more wayfinding signage, you might find that starts to seed it, but you have to think about the fact that this is not as simple as the reason why customers aren't coming downtown is because they haven't been invited. And all they need is an invitation, and then they're going to change their retail habits. Changing retail habits takes some effort and repetition and truly kind of reshaping that. So that's what I was able to work on since yesterday. So hopefully it was a little, hopefully it was at least helpful. I'd love to open it up for your thoughts. Does the overall strategy make sense? Do the things that I identified as tools that you need to be able to have a full-blown toolbox, does that make sense? What are y'all's thoughts as a board?
I'm surprised.
I think if I'm understanding this right, I think it's important to emphasize that if we adopt this, we stick with it. We don't sometimes for Music Fest go to our old logos and stuff like that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's, everything has we've got to create this consistency of brand so that every time they see that half a ticket, then that's what they think of.
Right. And one of the things, first of all, you're exactly right. If you are going to adopt something new, you need to adopt it. And you need to do away with the old and replace with the new. But you also need to change your mindset about how you communicate. You have to make sure that you understand when is it the right time for us to be promoting the organization and acknowledging that the organization is the one who is doing this or sponsoring that or putting this on, versus when is it important for us to be building value in our district. So there are going to be circumstances where you are producing pieces that have two logos on them at the same time. And if that exists, chances are your downtown logo is going to be the more prominent, and then your Main Street logo is going to be some sort of acknowledgement on there that you are responsible for helping to pull this off. In reviewing your past materials, I think that there hasn't necessarily been a defined character-driven style. There's been a style that has been derived from the designer. And they are consistent because there was consistency in the designer. But you also have what we call sponsor soup. You know, the bottom fifth of your poster is dedicated to a sea of logos. And so you have to be very sensitive about how are we handling all this stuff, how much value is this giving, where are we putting our identity, and what role is that identity playing. So when you're doing events that are directly helping your businesses, you want to make sure that those businesses understand that this is something that Main Street is doing to help you. Where you're going out and you're buying ads to go downtown, first and forefront in telling the story. So absolutely, to me, when you adopt, and start to Good. Yeah. That could be part of the offer. I can see how that could help a team action. Absolutely. And it's funny, I had on those recommendations last night on the different icons, and then when I got the brand guide from you guys this morning, it was like, oh, it's different images, but it's a similar approach. And that similar approach, I think one of the things that I love the most about what Matt is doing is when you look at both the consistency but also the variation in your marketing, to me at least, I feel that very clear inspiration of the old school screen printed concert posters.
Yeah, Hat Show Print was our inspiration.
Yeah. So I purposefully went away from that design inspiration a little as I was showing the implementation because I felt like that was something that truly was Matt's. And it shows how you can connect without copying. And I think that's really, really important, is being able to preserve those individual design influences so the essence of your message stays true to the different organizations and districts. Any other thoughts, questions? Anything glaringly missing that you were hoping that we would talk about that I completely forgot? Because that's very likely.
We're gonna send this whole presentation to Beth, so that
Absolutely. So let me tell you a little bit about how this works. What I'm going to do, I'm recording this presentation, so I'll be able to share it as a video for anybody that wasn't with us. I'm also going to save it as a PDF file and share it with you all. The intentions are everything that you see today is now yours. I'm going to prepare all of those things, all the different files. I save them in 5 different file formats, all the different color variations, and give you all the full digital design package. The typefaces are actually free. So that was one of the nice things, was some of the decisions that were made on the front end were from free typefaces. So I'll be able to share with you the typefaces, all the color definitions, and I'm going to produce a style guide document for you as well. Now, as an organization, I hope that there are certain elements that you see and you're like, okay, let's run with that. There's enough variation built into it, so if there's a certain element that you don't like, it's like, we're not going to use that right now. I don't love that. You might hate the ticket, you know? It's like, I don't really like the ticket. I'd rather just be in a solid square. So let's use that and not use that. That's why there are all these different variations. And then hopefully, I mean, you've already seen 3 logo options for a Main Street organization, then you come in and see this recommendation as it relates to a series of families. Even if it's not 100% there, hopefully it will help to push that whole conversation forward so that you feel like you've seen enough and now understand enough that you can land yeah, literally all these resources. I started building a folder of examples for you all, so the things that I didn't actually design for you, but I feel like will be helpful as you take these recommendations are in there as well. So literally, the whole package gets sent over and shared with the organization. No thoughts?
I guess they like it, 'cause they're not shy, so.
Nobody lit a chair on fire, so.
They're not.
But one of the things I see, and a lot, some of the feedback we've gotten from the downtown area is they don't know who we are. You know, there are some of us that stand out, I mean, because don't know who this board is. I can see, you know, I'm sitting here, a couple of the images you had, transfer them to a ball cap like that, and put your husbands in them, or you wear them. T-shirts, anytime we're doing anything downtown, I mean anything downtown, as transfer some of this image work to the T-shirts, and let folks know that, hey, yeah, Main Street's down here, buttons, you know, lifting the load. And I think identity is a big piece of what we need as a board, as a group of volunteers.
Absolutely.
And a lot of this is gonna just, to me, just lens.
Well, and your point about kind of awareness and acknowledgement, I mean, I was in a community 2 weeks ago, and we actually, this was an idea that they had been using, but their implementation wasn't great, but they had designed a card that every single board member had. And they carried around these cards with them. And it was interesting because they were like, you know, our presence isn't felt because when Carl walks in, Carl's from Bancorp South, not from Main Street. And, you know, with each one of you, you come in from Murphy USA, or you come in from your insurance agency, and so there's this acknowledgement of what you're connected to, and therefore, your impact is only on two shoulders. And so their whole thing was, we're just gonna drop these cards every time we
We
go.
absolutely talked about that.
Yeah.
After the holidays, we were like, every board member, it may not have their name on it, it may just have Main Street on it, but.
Yeah,
sorry,
yes, it does not have
yeah,
their name on
Sorry,
it.
we missed you.
It does not have their name on it. Sometimes we do the sorry we missed you. Sometimes we do Main Street is here. You know, and it's just like, just want to let you know, Main Street believes in you. We stopped by today. You know, sometimes we have a blank where you can do a personal signature real quick just to put your name on there. Sometimes they're left because you went to a restaurant and you ate. You just wanted somebody to know, hey, you know, somebody from Main Street was here. It started at actually one of the first times we ever saw it. It was a police department that was doing it, and because the downtown businesses were accusing the police of not patrolling the district. So they started dropping the door tags. And it's like, well, if it works for police, then it works for Main Street managers. So we started dropping the, hey, you say I never come by to see you? Not my fault you're never in your business. I'm going to start dropping a card every time I go by. And then it's like, you might be able to say that you haven't seen me in 4 months, but look at that stack of cards. It wasn't because I didn't come, you know. So it just helps to kind of increase the impact of that work, because if you are getting your manager out on the ground, you are getting them around into the businesses, you need to make sure you're maximizing that impact of the presence and effort, because that takes a lot of time to walk store to store and talk with folks. Any other ideas or anything else that, the one thing that I will tell you I did not get to, and I didn't get to it just because of timing, is the point that Austin brought up yesterday, and it's that brand character or that narrative. I'm going to work on a little paragraph of you. It's going to be a starter for you. It's simply with the timing that I have and the amount of folks that I was able to talk to. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing kind of a full blown, but hopefully it'll be a nice kind of, it'll be a starter narrative for you so that you can kind of take that and run with it. But you have to decide what makes most sense. Does it make most sense to have one that's very downtown oriented or one that's very organizational, or maybe it's a multiple paragraph and it's like paragraph 1 talks about how great downtown is, and then paragraph 2 talks about behind the scenes, there's a group that's bringing this district to life, and that is this. So that could be, I'll work on that. I just didn't have time. Yes, ma'am.
I wasn't here yesterday, but did you discuss, things like, the guitars that we've put downtown? Did you discuss that at all?
It was the only thing that was really brought up as it related to public art was that there was the desire to continue on and do some of the ones that might relate to timber industry, something like that. And I think what you have now is nice and engaging, and just as you continue to do that public art, make sure that you're doing something that is enthralling, that brings people in. I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say don't do public art unless it can generate a selfie, because that's not what I mean. But being able to have something that kind of draws people into the art and creates that connection. Instead, I think for many years, communities did public art because they felt like they needed to show that they were cultural, and it ended up being very passive presence. And I think the things that are really interesting are the ones that we had a high school senior in Greenville, South Carolina, who for his senior project decided to do 11 bronze sculptures of mice and hide them up and down our main street. So it turned into a scavenger hunt. And now literally all hours of the day, you will see families with their kids like aggressively hunting rodents in our downtown. It's like one of the only times that looking for mice is a good thing in your downtown. But
We already do that, but they are alive.
they're alive, right? So just doing things that I always urge communities to search for what your answer is. Chicago did the cows, and then they did this, I think, sofas next or something, and then the wave of every community across the country doing a fiberglass painted version of something happened. So, as you go through, truly dig into the El Dorado spirit, the El Dorado flavor, and figure out something that can be the next iteration that you can truly own. And one thing that I will say that could be instrumental for the Main Street organization is there is such a thing as a public art master plan. And master plan is a big word that makes it sound expensive, and it's not at all. It just means that you actually sit down, think about your district, and think about how public art placement could serve a strategic purpose in helping people to navigate from district to district, place to place, venue to venue. So if that's not already done, that might be a really interesting exercise that MAD, Main Street, a couple of the different entities might explore. It doesn't have to be super complicated, and I can even share an example of what one looks like. Any other thoughts? We did pretty good, an hour on the dot. So we're going to hang around for 2 more hours. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you all so much for your time over the past 2 days. I know it's never fun to have to do 2 meetings 2 days in a row with the same organization. I want you to know that I sincerely appreciate your time and commitment to this and your attention. And also, I just really appreciate the work that you guys have done for the community, because it's evident. I go a lot of places, and El Dorado is a cool community, and you've just got a lot of really, really good things going on here. And it's an exciting time. So thank you for everything that you've done, and hopefully you'll find some resources and some suggestions out of this that'll be helpful. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
And tell everybody that you do see how cool this place is.
Oh, I sure will. I sure will.